A few weeks ago, after just 2 weeks in power, the Romanian government announced a decree that would decriminalize certain corruption offenses. This was the breaking point for many Romanians who saw this decree as an example of the wider system of corruption and injustice that ruled the country. They also saw it as an attempt by the government to protect its own members, since so many of the people who faced such charges were government officials. To make matters worse, the decree was announced into law at 11 o'clock at night. And the government announced that it would go into effect in just a few days. Information spread quickly through social media, and within hours, thousands of people had gathered in the main square in Bucharest. The protests grew over the next few days, even in the midst of heavy snow and freezing temperatures, as more and more Romanians joined in to pressure the government to withdraw the decree. During the largest protests so far, more than 500,000 Romanians gathered in cities across the country. And in Bucharest, they sang their national anthem, and protesters used their cell phones to create this massive sea of lights to symbolize the shedding of light on corruption. The next day, only a week after the decree was announced, the justice minister who had backed it resigned. But the decree remained in effect, and protesters realized that their fight wasn't over. They went on to hold a children's protest, and one protest where people even brought their dogs, because who doesn't love children and dogs? This guy's sign says, "I feel like howling." Eventually, the government realized that they couldn't withstand the pressure from their citizens. And so, just over a week ago, they were forced to cancel the decree. The Romanian protests reveal an important insight that we can all learn from. And that is that corrupt and oppressive governments, they rely on the ignorance and weakness of the people in order to carry out these abuses. These abuses are only possible when people are too weak to defend against them. The protection of human rights and of political freedoms depends on the existence of an organized, well-connected, and engaged citizenry that both understands its rights and what to do if those rights are violated. The good news is that the tools to do this effectively exist, and they're being improved every day by citizens, activists, organizers, and scholars around the world. I've witnessed this over the past 15 years at the Albert Einstein Institution, where I've been working with Gene Sharp, the foremost scholar on the topic. Gene Sharp began his research in the 1950s, and since then, he's written dozens of books on the topic that have been read by people around the world. These books have played a major role in spreading the understanding of nonviolent resistance, how it works, and how it can be used to advance the issues that we care about. This is Gene Sharp's list of 198 methods of nonviolent action. These are the specific actions that people can carry out, and they range from protests to social boycotts to more powerful economic boycotts, political non-cooperation, labor strikes, and finally, nonviolent intervention, which is the most powerful category of nonviolent methods. These tools are now more important than ever before. Around the world, we're seeing the rise of so-called populist leaders who take advantage of both people's frustration with social, economic, and political conditions, as well as their feelings of helplessness, to claim that they alone can deliver the changes that people are desperate for. In the United States, there's a lot of concern about the direction in which our country is headed. People are realizing that just putting their faith in the existing leadership or in existing institutions to solve the problems in their communities is no longer an option. They also realize that protesting policies that they don't agree with on its own does nothing to fundamentally change the situation, as long as these actions are not part of a larger strategy. So they're organizing in new ways to actually build power and capacity. They're creating networks of people, usually small groups of 10 to 15 people, who meet periodically in living rooms, in classrooms, and places of worship across America. They meet to talk about their problems, the issues they care about, and how they might act together in case of a crisis. They organize educational workshops, and they discuss their strengths and their weaknesses. They discuss what resources they have and what resources they can get in order to meet the needs of their communities and to fight for the issues that they care about. In short, they're learning to think strategically. This is a New York Times article about this phenomenon. And it's not just groups in the United States, but activists and organizers that I speak to from all over the world who tell me they understand they can no longer operate based on intuition and trial and error. This is especially true because they are increasingly facing opponents who have massive resources at their disposal. Opponents that control the media, the banking system, the transportation system, and also the tools of violent repression, the police, the military, and the prison system. And these opponents are constantly learning and developing better techniques to defeat social and political movements, which means that activists must also innovate if they're to have a chance of winning this nonviolent arms race. I'd like to close by sharing something that I recently learned. Since October, South Korea has been experiencing the largest protests in that country's history. The protesters are demanding the resignation of the president after she was found to have acted in a corruption scandal. In the course of a few weeks, the protests grew from a few thousand to more than 2 million people, which led to the president's impeachment. Protests are continuing as South Korea's constitutional court is deciding whether to uphold that impeachment. So a few weeks ago, I was in touch with a South Korean group, and I asked them where they get their inspiration from. One of their answers might surprise you, because it came from halfway across the world. It came from Guatemala. They told me that the 2015 anti-corruption movement had been very important for them. And it wasn't only because it was a source of inspiration. They were actually studying what happened here in order to learn what they themselves should do. They saw the Guatemalan case, the extent to which it was a success, as a source of strategic insight. The fact that South Koreans are watching and learning from Guatemalans reveals a powerful insight. Well, it means to me that what we do in our small corner of the globe, whether we accept a future of injustice and oppression, or whether we choose to fight against these conditions, affects not only our lives, the lives of our families and of our communities, but perhaps even people in places that are far away that may be looking to us for inspiration and for knowledge. We're at a time when the line between dictatorships and democracies are more and more difficult to define. Democracies around the world are increasingly restricting the rights and freedoms of their citizens. Meanwhile, dictatorships are using elections and legislative bodies and negotiations to give themselves a facade of respect for human rights and political freedoms. In the end, though, democratic constitutions and procedures are only pieces of paper. If those in positions of power think that they can act with impunity and that the people will do nothing to stop them, then a piece of paper will also not stop them. In dictatorships, most people recognize this, but in democracies, we sometimes forget it. Nonviolent action doesn't depend on pieces of paper or the promises of our leaders. Nonviolent action relies on people and institutions that can ensure that leaders serve the interests of the people that elect them. The power of nonviolent action comes from building the strength and capacity of people. And with that strength and capacity, people can fight for the society they want, and then be prepared to defend it from being taken away. Thank you. It's an honor to be here today in Guatemala City on UFM's beautiful campus and to share the stage with such talented, committed, and brave people. And I look forward to hearing what they have to share with us. Thank you all for being here today and for seeking your own path and helping to make the world more just and free for us all. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you.